Welcome to episode 25 of the Think Wildlife podcast. Today I speak to David Jeggo, who is the chair of the Asian Songbird Trade Group of the IUCN. We talk about how the illegal wildlife trade decimated songbird populations across Southeast Asia, in particular Indonesia. We also talk about what conservation measures have been taken so far and what is the way forward for this very beautiful but rare bird group. My first question for you is that what caused the Asian songbird crisis?
The cause of it is overexploitation, the trapping of wild songbirds in Asia, particularly in Indonesia, although it's not the only country by any means. It's just unsustainable, so it's causing a number of species to become particularly threatened.
So, what is the driving cause of the Asian songbird trade?
It's really the popularity of keeping songbirds in Southeast Asia, and as I say, we focus a lot on Indonesia, and there's several factors that keeping cage birds is very popular at different levels. Just the so-called cut flower songbirds, where pretty birds are bought and kept and die, and then more are bought from the markets. Others which are particularly attractive because of their song. Some are targeted particularly because of their rarity. And then also there's the question of songbird competitions, and the prizes that can be won, and also just taking part as a hobby, which targets certain songbirds. And because of the very name, their songs make them very popular within these contests.
Which are some of the species which are most affected by the?
Um, yeah, it's somewhat phased in terms of what's popular at the time, but particularly things like white rump shama because of their song. An early victim, or if you like, perhaps not quite the right word, but a species affected by the songbird trade was the Bali Mynah, which is endemic to the island of Bali. It's a striking white bird with a crest. And it's a very charismatic species, so it was particularly targeted. It was also at a time when there was an excessive trade of this species into Europe and North America in the early 70s, and it was brought pretty much to very close to extinction by the trade. And then other species, black-winged mynah in Indonesia, the leaf birds currently, even some things like sunbirds are affected. So there's a whole range of songbird species that are affected.
How has the songbird trade been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's changed certain aspects in terms of perhaps rather than having the markets where birds are available, a lot of the trade's gone online. But I think this was happening anyhow, so that by following on the internet what's available, that's taking over some of the trade from the traditional markets. But it also affected perhaps ability of people to get into the field, and also maybe staff personnel to protect certain areas. But I think it really just caused a pause more than anything. And I think just basically it won't have any lasting effect other than just causing a pause and then picking up again after the event.
What are some of the other threats faced by Asian songbirds?
Yeah, it's the classic sort of threat in terms of habitat destruction, pesticide use, and they're the main things. But by and large, for a number of these songbirds, the habitat remains, and it is the the trade in them, the trapping, sometimes in combination with something else. Like a very common species formerly within Java, the Javan pied starling, as far as we can see, is now virtually extinct in the wild, if not extinct in the wild. And we wonder whether there are other factors just purely than the trapping, although the trapping we suspect was the major cause of this.
What have been some of the broader ecological impacts of the songbird crisis?
Um, it's perhaps hard to measure that, but certainly as elements within the biodiversity within habitats, to lose elements like songbirds from it, one suspects has some effect on the whole dynamics of the habitats. And certainly from a point of view of the lack of singing within the forests or the more open areas, the savannas, where whatever the habitat is, the lack of song from that. There's certain elements, perhaps from the point of view of seed dispersal and pollination and all those sort of things that the songbirds may help contribute to. And also just the very fact that they would possibly be predating quite a large proportion of the sort of invertebrate fauna from the areas, which might have some effect. But mainly it's the loss of the songbirds from the habitat that's the issue at stake here.
Now let's talk about the Asian Songbird Trade Specialist Group, the IUCN, which you're a chair of. So how did this specialist group come into being, and what are the aims of this group?
Right. It came into being as a result of a songbird summit, or Songbird Crisis Summit, which was held in Singapore in 2015, which was really born out of the coming together of concern there was within a group within the European Association of Zoos and Aquaria, which at the time was the Asian, what were we then? We've changed our names several times. It was the Threatened Asian Songbird Working Group of IAZA, which was looking at some of the species that were kept in European zoos, particularly the Bali Mynah, but also blue-crowned laughing thrush from China, and emerging ones like the Javan green magpie and black-winged myna, and the Wildlife Reserves Singapore, which is now Mandai Nature, both thinking along the lines that this was a big problem, why it was called the Songbird Crisis Summit, which brought together a number of experts and interested parties within the concern for the songbirds. And one of the recommendations coming from that summit was that it would be very helpful to have an IUCN SSC specialist group purely targeted at trying to address this what was now realized to be a really grave situation for a number of songbird species within Asia.
What is the specialist group doing to tackle the trade specifically, and what have been some challenges in doing so?
Right. One of the outcomes and recommendations of that first meeting, the Songbird Crisis Summit, was to define 5 areas of particular need within the way of tackling it. So those 5 needs and areas of specialization are field research, genetic research, trade and legislation dynamics and investigation, community engagement and education, particularly important, and also conservation, breeding, and reintroduction. And so they're the 5 main themes which the specialist group operates under. And the particular challenge is that it's a very popular culturally and within a number of Asian countries. It supports a number of livelihoods, and it's difficult to control. And it was also perhaps an issue that out there that wasn't well understood. Particularly, perhaps it isn't still particularly well understood. So it's a very challenging one to get around. There's no simple solutions to it.
The specialist group is also involved in conservation breeding of the songbirds and their reintroduction. So, what role does conservation breeding have in conservation, and how effective has the project been for songbirds?
Yeah, it was recognized early on in that some of these species were so rare and there was no immediate solution to their decline and their endangered status that it was very wise in a precautionary way to bring some of the species into captivity for conservation breeding, just to safeguard their very survival, and have a population that could eventually, when conditions were right, be reintroduced into the wild. And I can't now quite remember how many of the currently 43 taxa are of particular concern, but a number of those have been designated as in requiring conservation breeding programs, things like Javan green magpie, black-winged starling, Javan pied starling, rufous-fronted laughing thrush in particular, and various, in particular, two breeding centres within Java are the centre of these conservation breeding efforts.
The special group is also involved in the genetic research of songbirds. Can you elaborate a bit on the work being done by the specialist group?
Yeah, much of the genetic work of the specialist group is based around a laboratory in the University of Singapore, overseen by a gentleman called Frank Rind, who also leads our genetics group within the specialist group. The value of the genetic works is on two fronts, I suppose, in particular, to focus on. One is the resolution of the taxonomy of species. As the group has advanced, and looking at things, a number of species or subspecies that were at the time have been through genetic work determined that they're sufficiently distinct to be species in their own right. And the other aspect is looking at the genetic variability within populations, particularly within the conservation breeding programs. The question of the taxonomy, which is largely held by the genetics, but not purely so, is an important one, because we really don't want to overlook any taxa that should be conserved, and so it's also led within the group to now not have a list of species but a list of taxa, and some of these are subspecies which we feel are particularly worthy or important to conserve, and a number of these actually have proven to be sufficiently distinct to be good species, and this is perhaps of particular importance when we're looking at the IUCN Red List, which for birds only addresses red list status for birds which are designated as species, and doesn't go down to the subspecies level. So the genetic research is very, very important to us.
What do you think is the way forward for songbird conservation in the near future, and have the conservation measures had any success so far?
It's difficult to say. I mean, the group, will say, with the Crisis Summit was only held in 2015. The specialist group was approved in 2017. And it's a big, complex question to address in a very quick way, although it's a very urgent for a number of species. Some of the conservation breeding programs are really taking off, and birds are being brought in to found those. There's a lot of research going on, and research is very important for us to get a clearer understanding of the problems involved and how to tackle them from a point of view of just the species abundance in the wild, but also research into what are the real drivers for the songbird crisis, and where measures should be targeted. As I just said, with the genetic research going on, that's very helpful. And looking at community engagement is particularly important, and education. And so on a number of these fronts, the specialist group is doing what it can to assist. It's not purely down to the specialist group, it's encouraging others to become involved, and just generally drawing attention to the issue, which was, I think for many, or for a long time, went under the radar and wasn't realized as the problem it really is. So yeah, on a number of fronts. And I think there are two fronts really to work on. One is the very acute problem of species becoming so rare that they're in danger of becoming extinct, and then the longer term solutions to bring in a reduction in the trade to make it, if it continues, to make it sustainable, and so that and also to find secure areas where songbirds still exist and they can be protected adequately.
So my final question for you today is that how can individuals help contribute to the songbird crisis?
I think there's a number of ways. Obviously, a lot of this, and it's not purely down to funds, but a lot of the work that needs to be done requires funding. So, and projects are there to be funded, but just becoming more aware of the problem. And I think in the countries where it's the trapping and within Asia where it goes on, just generally becoming more aware of the question, becoming more appreciative of songbirds in the wild rather than just in cages, and engaging with, if you like, citizen science for one thing. We or the specialist group working with colleagues in country had a big bird month in Java and Bali, where ordinary people went out and just recorded what birds they saw. So I think, and a general understanding of the threat to some of these songbirds. It's not so clear quite what citizens within Europe, for example, can do to help. Apart from, I think, general awareness is useful, but also some of these birds are still being traded internationally, and to be aware of international trade and to encourage governments around the world to support legislation to control the international trade of endangered species, and realizing that songbirds are among those. I think the whole question is really one of the biggest issues there is today or one of the big issues there is for wildlife conservation around the world, and that is over-exploitation of wild populations. And this is a particularly acute case of over-exploitation of songbirds by their removal from the wild.
So thank you so much for your time. It is a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you. It's been a great. I'm always very happy and pleased to spread the word about the songbird crisis, and just encourage everybody to become more aware of it, and do what can be done to bring about a better situation for songbirds. And it's a conservation issue that is we can find solutions to, and we should be optimistic about making it's a safer place for a number of songbird species in Asia.